Hi, my name's Cheese, and welcome to another Fossil Sweeper Progress Update video. If you haven't heard of the project before, you can find an overview here, but the TLDR is, it's like Minesweeper, but you're digging up fossils, and you need to build skeletons out of the stuff you find. Over the past month or so, I've continued to work on dig phase environment backgrounds, but I'll be coming back to talk about that in the next video. This time, I'll be chatting with Peter about the game's soundtrack. If you like what you hear here and would like more of Peter's perspectives on Fossil Sweeper, composing, or music in general, you can find some links to an extended cut in the description. For now though, Peter, would you like to introduce yourself?
My name's Peter Silk, I am a composer and I have previously worked on a couple of different projects with Josh. One of them is Hive Time. We also did the soundtrack for Bat-Egg as well, which included some of your own themes.
So when I did the prototype for Fossil Sweeper, I had knocked together a very quick and dirty generative music solution, and you'd given me some advice and feedback on that. At that time, did you have any thoughts or feelings about what you would do for a game like Fossil Sweeper?
Yeah, well, I suppose that even from that kind of early stage was thinking about what the elements of a soundtrack for this kind of game would need to be. So I knew, at least for the dig phases, something quite calm, something quite able to kind of be in the background, that sort of thing. Also, there's a couple of other aspects to it. There's kind of wonder on one end and a bit of melancholy on the other end, and it comes from, I suppose, just thinking about the job that you're doing in the game, because what you are essentially doing in this game is you're kind of researching and digging up these stories from the past about some of these animal species, many of which just no longer exist, and so there's something inherently a little bit sad about the task, but then there's also the kind of wonder element as well, because there's something quite wonderful too about this ability that we have to look in the ground and piece together all of this information about the history of the world as well.
For me, one of the things that was important was I wanted to early on narrow down what the map phase music was going to be.
Yeah, so quite early on I worked on music for the title screen and for the map phase as well. I was thinking a lot about the red lines being drawn on the map in like Indiana Jones films and games and things like that when I was thinking about how to write that bit. But that also brought in this slightly bigger orchestral element that also creeps in around the edges of the other pieces of music in the game as well, so you get like a slightly more orchestral sounding soundtrack than the previous ones I've done for you. I suppose there's two things. There's an aspect of it, the adventure one that we just talked about, where it feels like bold and bombastic in a way, so I wanted to have a little bit of that without going too far in that direction and feeling jarring. And then I bring a lot of orchestral elements back in the museum phase as well, and there it feels like there's a kind of grandeur to it. It's like the culmination of everything that you've set out to do, and there's a sort of sense of there being a quiet majesty to it, where it's all you're seeing all of these things in display in these big kind of cavernous halls, and it felt like it wanted a bit of a wider sound again for that sort of thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it gives a nice context for reflecting on the things you've done as well. So the assembly phase has a much more hectic gameplay to it than the dig phase, and for me as a designer, I like the juxtaposition of those two things. Were there any challenges involved in trying to find the right energy for the assembly music?
That one I think came together fairly quickly. At that point I had made quite a few pieces of dig music, but it all kind of needs to be in around the same place. None of it can be particularly energetic. None of it can stick out too far so that it becomes distracting. And I think when I got to work on the assembly music, I thought, you know what, it would be really nice to just kind of take a break from that for a minute and work on something that was much more lively. And so that really came out of me wanting a break from the type of theme that is necessary for the dig phases.
I think it works. I think it's come together really well. I really like, in particular in the dig music, how the pieces evolve over time. In my mind, meandering feels like the right term for me, because it feels like a wandering through a conceptual space, and then somehow it manages to arrive back where it started so that it can loop seamlessly. When I listen to it, I feel like I'm watching someone solve a Rubik's Cube.
Well, thank you. And the figuring out how to get back to the start was probably actually one of the most challenging things about these, because I did deliberately want them to kind of wander a bit, so I'd be on one idea for a while and I'd introduce some layers to that idea, and then the way that I'd generally move on from that is I'd take one or two aspects of that original idea and I'd start just kind of moving those in another direction. So even though it feels like at some point during a lot of these tracks it moves into another phase where different things are happening and different elements are being introduced, it's almost always there's something about the previous part of it that is retained, so it doesn't feel too jarring, and so it's like a little sleight of hand thing where any one moment to moment, it doesn't feel like you've moved very far, but then when you think about where you came from, you've moved quite a long way. And then it's just a kind of matter of, okay, figuring out, okay, what elements do I need to bring back now and reincorporate to take it back to a place where it kind of can loop reasonably seamlessly.
Another piece that moves away from that slower style is the research music, where you ended up bringing in more sound effects and samples.
That particular piece, the first idea for that, weirdly, came from Star Wars, I think.
Oh,
I think
wow.
that's where that initially came from. And it's one of those rare occasions where the initial idea for the piece came from a music theory concept. So, if you listen to it's the Rebel Alliance theme from Star Wars, that theme in Star Wars, it's just major chords sliding around, and so it made me think, okay, so if I did something like in that Rebel Alliance theme, but bring the mood way low-key compared to that, and just had some chords which I kind of slid around in parallel, then that could create the kind of pleasantly uncertain effect that I wanted from that particular piece. So that's kind of where that came from.
Something that we did for this soundtrack was to write a song to include.
Yes, so we had quite a lot of fun. This time we just decided, we did a song with Hive Time, why don't we do it again? And I think you'd already had this initial idea for a song in mind, so we passed it back and forth a little. I would say if we think about which parts are more mine and which parts are more yours, it's difficult to say in some senses, but I think the kind of chorus section, the chords kind of came heavily out of what you wrote, and to a certain extent the tune as well, and that's also very true in the bridge section that happens towards the end of the tune as well. And then the verse part it's a lot of my tune and chords, and making up those verse parts and like pre-chorus parts as well, and the lyrics come pretty much completely from you, but with some tweaks from me just to kind of fit the meter better in some parts.
Yeah, I think when I started with the chorus in general, and then I guess I'd written the verse more as like a poem, or how I would approach writing a poem, and so I hadn't entirely worked out how I was going to do the verse, but then your chords came in, and that felt like a really good way to handle it. I haven't yet done the work that I want to do in order to get that piece of music into the game, but what I would like to do is to have something that takes place in the museum, where maybe there'll be a few skeletons here and there, but there'll be plaques with people's names and information on what they did and that kind of stuff.
Nice, yeah, I like it.
A very big thank you to the supporters going by on screen at the moment. Their support has helped me eat while making this game, and I am so very appreciative. A huge thanks also to Screen Tasmania, who supported this project with a small grant. Anyway, that's about it for today. If you'd like to keep track of development or try the playable prototype, you can find some links in the description. And if you're super keen to check out what we talked about here today, I make early test builds available to my supporters on Patreon. Thanks for watching, and a very big thank you to Peter for sharing his time, perspective, and skills. Goodbye!